Hello, my name is Ryan and my project is on the nitrogen cycle. So why is the nitrogen cycle important to our home community? The nitrogen cycle helps maintain soil fertility, supports plant growth, and ultimately sustains the entire food web. It is also a contributing factor to agriculture productivity and ecosystem health. I love nature and I'm sure you all do too, so this is an important step in maintaining a healthy environment. Before we begin, there's a few things to note. The first thing I would like to mention is nitrogen fixation in the atmosphere. This is an important step in the nitrogen cycle and plays a key role. However, in this project, I will focus on the nitrogen cycle in the soil conducted by bacteria. It's still worth mentioning that in the atmosphere, lightning can break the triple bond in atmospheric nitrogen. Nitrogen will then react with oxygen to eventually turn into nitrates, which are heavily used by plants as a nitrogen source. ATP. What is this thing? I'm sure most of you have heard of it before, so let me show you why it's important in the nitrogen cycle. ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is involved in providing the energy needed for all of these reactions in the nitrogen cycle. So let me show you how. Bacteria use ATP in the nitrogen cycle to provide the energy needed to break bonds. This is very similar to the lightning mentioned previously. They can use enzymes to break off a phosphate from the ATP molecule, which provides the energy from the breaking of the bonds. This will lead ATP to eventually become ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate. You see what happened there? It went from triphosphate to diphosphate. I just mentioned enzymes, which I'm sure some of you were questioning. So let me break that down too. Bacteria use enzymes to facilitate the transfer of electrons and protons during reactions. All these enzymes are used in the nitrogen cycle. In this project, I'll just refer to these as enzymes. The only thing you really have to remember is that the enzymes allow the transfer of electrons and protons. So with that being said, let's move on with the nitrogen cycle. The first step of the nitrogen cycle is called nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixing bacteria often live in the roots of certain plants. A notable species of plants that do this is the legume family. Nitrogen fixation is the activation of nitrogen gas by the nitrogen-fixing bacteria's enzyme. This process requires a significant amount of energy, which is provided by ATP like I mentioned earlier. Once activated, the nitrogen is reduced to ammonia. This reduction process involves the addition of electrons and protons to nitrogen gas. Ammonia can be used by plants and other organisms as a nitrogen source for building proteins and other essential molecules. However, it's likely to undergo further reductions. This slide is an honorable mention to indigenous people who had this figured out a long time ago. The Three Sisters method, which is the photo on the left side of the screen, is a method used by northeastern indigenous people. Corn, which is a very nitrogen-hungry plant, is fed by the legume plant. We now know that legumes are nitrogen-fixing plants. This is a symbiotic relationship because the tall corn stalk is used as a trellis by the legume plant. The squash is used as a living ground cover as well as providing moisture retention and protecting the soil from sunlight. And then on the right side of the screen, you can see one of our native nitrogen fixing plants, which is the California buckwheat. Okay, so far in the nitrogen cycle, we have ammonia. So ammonia will further react with the absence of bacteria. In anaerobic soils, which means the absence of oxygen, are typically acidic. This is because acidic soils lack oxygen, causing an abundance of protons. When ammonia reacts, it will become ammonium, which is able to be assimilated by some plants that are adapted in acidic soils. Aerobic soils, which means the presence of oxygen, are neutral or alkaline. This is because the soil consists of hydroxide ions. If ammonia reacts with water, it will produce ammonium and hydroxide ions. However, since the soil consists of hydroxide, it will have a reverse reaction and return back to ammonia. Like I said before, plants that do prefer ammonium generally thrive in acidic soils. In acidic soils, ammonium does not undergo further nitrification. This is because certain bacteria that further oxidizes ammonia does not accumulate in acidic soil, thus making an abundance of ammonium. A fun example of a plant that loves acidic soil would be the blueberry plant. I'm sure most of you have bought one before at the store, and you'll notice that when you purchase a blueberry plant, it often comes with a tag that says acidic or acid-loving plant or acidic soil, and this is the reason why. So I just mentioned nitrification in the previous slide, so let me break that down in this slide. The second step of the nitrogen cycle is called nitrification, which is basically a fancy way to say ammonia turns into nitrite, and then nitrite turns into nitrate. Now this is a two-step process, and it starts with ammonia being oxidized to nitrite by bacteria using an enzyme and ATP. These bacteria are commonly referred as nitrifying bacteria. In the second step, you'll see that nitrite reacts with water, which is facilitated by nitrite oxidizing bacteria and is further oxidized into nitrate. The next step in the nitrogen cycle is called assimilation. Nitrate is the primary form of nitrogen taken up by most plants in the soil. Nitrate is absorbed by the plant's roots through specialized transport proteins located on the root cell membranes. These proteins, known as nitrate transporters, facilitate the movement of nitrate ions into the root cells. Some plants, especially those in acidic soils, prefer to take up ammonium as their nitrogen source. Ammonium is also absorbed by the plant's roots through specific transport proteins. Once inside of the plant cell, nitrate and ammonium are assimilated into organic compounds, primarily amino acids. It's important to note that plants in the assimilation process are reducing nitrate and ammonium to eventually get to NH2, which is a key player in amino acids, and we will talk about that in a little bit. So here is an amino acid structure. Just kidding. Remember how I said before how NH2 is an important player in amino acid structures? Well, you can clearly see here that NH2 is a part of the amino acid. NH2 is actually called the amino group in the amino acid. But why is this important? Good question. These are all amino acids. So one last time, I want you all to see the amino groups. Remember the amino groups are the NH2. So now that you believe me that the amino group is present in amino acids, let's get to the part where this is important. And here's one more shot of an amino acid. Now here is a protein, and in the simplest of ways to explain this, a protein is a complex chain of amino acids. The point I am desperately trying to make is that nitrogen is the building block of plants' ability to make protein. We all know that proteins help us humans grow. Well, the same goes for plants. Now let's get back to the nitrogen cycle. The next step is ammonification, Organic matter, such as dead plant material or animal residues, is decomposed by bacteria and fungi. Enzymes are produced by bacteria that break down complex organic molecules, such as amino acids, back into ammonia. These enzymes, produced by decomposing organisms, break the bonds holding the amino acids together, releasing the amino group. Remember, proteins are made up of amino acids, which contain nitrogen in their structure. This NH2 quickly reacts with water to form ammonia, which can then further be transformed through nitrification in the soil. So remember this step? Yeah, well, after ammonification, ammonia can go through this whole cycle all over again, creating a loop within the cycle. This just goes to show how amazing nature is at recycling its resources. The final step of the nitrogen cycle is denitrification. This just means nitrates turn back into atmospheric nitrogen. In this step, nitrate is reduced to nitrite, nitrite is reduced to nitric oxide, nitric oxide is then reduced to nitrous oxide, and nitrous oxide is reduced to nitrogen gas, which is the atmospheric nitrogen gas. Then denitrification plays a crucial role in the nitrogen cycle by returning nitrogen gas to the atmosphere, thus completing the whole cycle and maintaining a balance of nitrogen in the environment. So that was a lot. So let's review. Behind this black box is the nitrogen cycle. Let's go through this step by step. The first step is nitrogen fixation. Atmospheric nitrogen is reduced to ammonia and sometimes ammonium. What's next? Nitrification. Nice. Ammonia oxidates to nitrites and then to nitrate. What's next? Assimilation. Yeah, you got it. Plants absorb the nitrates and ammonium. What's next? This one's tough, but it's ammonification. Organic matter, like amino acids, are reduced into ammonia. This, as you can see, leads right back into the nitrification process. So what's next? This one I feel like is like the most obvious, but this is the final step, which is denitrification. Nitrates reduced to atmospheric nitrogen. And that is the complete nitrogen cycle. I hope this was somewhat easy to understand, and I hope you learned a lot from my project, and thank you for listening.